folks, and welcome to your local entrepreneur. My name is Cameron Khan, and today I have the absolute pleasure and honor of speaking to Mr. Geoff Thompson.
Cameron, how are you?
I'm a real I'm really well. Thank you, Geoff. I mean, like, just looking at your CV, we're talking about someone who's written nearly 40 books, 15 books, 15 books, 15 films, screenplays, BAFTA award-winning, one of the true martial artists still left out there, I think. And once upon a time, he was a doorman working in the factory, and amazing things have kind of just happened. So yeah, Geoff, like, for anyone who hasn't really come across you, or I'm sure there isn't, but just give us a flavor, a little taste of who you are, where you came from.
Yeah, well, I was still in the factories at the age of 32. People have this idea that, there's a cut-off date, that, if you haven't done it, if you haven't been to university, or if you haven't got an education, or if you haven't done it by a certain time, it's not going to happen. But I was still working in factories when my first book was published. I was still working as a bouncer when my first book was published by Summersdale Press. I'm still very linked to that world. I'm so sure it's possible to break out of that kind of mundane existence, the 9-to-5 existence, because I'm still quite close to it. And most of my friends are still there. Most of them are still in that same place. Now, I wanted to be a writer when I was a kid. When other kids were writing 3 lines, I was finding 15 pages and filling in the margins. It was in me to write. I didn't really have anything to write about. Then my life got interrupted at the age of 11. I tell this story often because it's very relevant to where I am. I was groomed and abused by a martial arts teacher, and that set me on a very difficult trajectory. So I think my trajectory was destined to be something, but it was interrupted. So I was infused with this parasite of fear at an early age, where I didn't believe you could trust anybody, not even your family, especially your family. I didn't feel you could trust anyone at all. Now, it seemed like it was a detrimental at the time, but later I realized it set me on the path of massive introspection, study, going into the revealed books, the hidden books, the exegesis, the explanation of the explanation of the explanation of the great books. So this fear that was infused in me at the age of 11 or 12 became a catalyst to do something extraordinary. And I don't think I could have done what I've done now with all the stuff I'm doing now, but if I hadn't have had that catalyst. Now, at the time, it didn't feel like it was a blessing or a gift, but I realized later on it was. I realized later on, when I stopped working out and started to work in, started to go inwards, what they would say in Islam, the greater jihad, the internal battle. I went in and started to cleanse these parasites out. I recognized there was latent energy there, massive energy. My body was filled with parasites because of what this person implanted in me at the age of 11. But those are just energy forms, and I can use those, I can go into those, I can convert them. If I bring them before the light, in other words, if I bring them before awareness, before consciousness, they don't just become light, Cameron, they become a light. They become a spiritual apostle that goes out into the world and works for you. So all of that dark stuff people have in them, the fears, the anxieties, the negative beliefs, they can be converted into an apostle, literally. So if I write a book called Fear, the Friend of Exceptional People, about how I overcame fear, that goes out and works as an apostle for me. I mean, I sold 150,000 copies of that to Men's Fitness magazine, and they used it as a cover mount. 150,000 apostles working in the world, and that was, I don't know, 20 years ago, and it's still out there working. All the stuff I do, I convert.
This is where it all started for me. Obviously, this is my copy, Watch My Back.
Watch My Back, yeah.
I got this when I lost my job. I remember what happened to me. I lost my job, and it was a career in itself. I remember thinking I got to start from scratch again, new life, new career, new everything. I remember picking up this book, randomly in Waterstone, sitting down. I read the whole thing and I ended up buying it, obviously. And it's always been something I've come back to. And there's so much in here. Like, I think anyone should just go into and delve into this. But I kind of wonder where you were in your life at that point when you began putting pen to paper and thinking, I'll document my memoir and I'll put it together and I'll publish it. I mean, these are big, big dreams on one hand.
Yeah.
So where were you in your life?
It didn't feel possible to me at the time. I had no certainty that it was possible. I had no proof of possibility. I'll tell you where I was. What happened to me at the age of 11 interrupted my life. I still continued in other martial arts, but always cautiously, and I became a good second dan, a good club player. Not anybody of any note, but a good club player. But I still suffered with depressions. I'd got this energy that wanted to come out, that wanted to create. Every time I was trying to create, I was bombarded with fear and debilitating depression. So these depressions were like the schoolyard bully. They used to just come into my life and devastate me and hang around for as long as they wanted to. I was terrified of my own biology. This one particular depression really brought me to my knees. I'd be waking up at 4 a.m. in the cold sweat, thinking it's going to be a long day. My wife's sleeping next to me, oblivious to my torture. My kids are asleep, and I feel as though I feel emasculated. I feel as though I can't even protect them. I'm following my wife around the house like a lost puppy because I'm so afraid. I'm afraid to leave the house. I hit this. I guess I bounce off the floor with this depression. I go as low as I can be, and then just suddenly from somewhere I feel this surge of rage or anger, righteous anger, where I just felt myself saying, I'm not living like this anymore. I cannot do this anymore. I'm not going to put up with this. I've got my wife, I've got children, I've got a life, I've got things I want to do. I'm not here to hide in my bedroom. I'm not here to be afraid of the world. So I realized this was my first proper connection with the soul, and the depression was rising up either to claim me or to be claimed. It was saying, either you're going to claim me and produce something eternal with me, or we're going to claim you and we're just going to keep you in a room for the rest of your life under medication. This connection with the soul came the moment I said, I'm going to do something about this. This idea dropped into my mind like a coin falling through water. Draw a fear pyramid. Write down all of the things you're afraid of and confront them one at a time. So I drew a pyramid on a piece of paper. I called it the fear pyramid. And on every step of the pyramid, I wrote down one of the things I was afraid of. My idea was, if I can confront all the things I'm afraid of and get desensitization to my endocrine system, get control of my sensual body, I can live in the world. Because I recognized that all the things I wanted to do were beyond that line of fear. But I daredn't cross it, because every time I did, I felt disproportionate terror. So I wrote the fears down, and where I had fear, suddenly I had curiosity. And the brain has a strange quirk, Cameron. It can't process fear and curiosity at the same time. So as soon as you start becoming curious, the fear dissipates. As soon as you start going, oh, what is this feeling? Maybe I can observe this feeling. Maybe I can lean into this feeling. Maybe I can intercourse with this feeling. What the Buddhists call leaning into the sharp edges. Instead of running away from it or medicating it, or self-medicating it with alcohol or sex or whatever people do, maybe instead of running away from it, I should run towards it. Maybe instead of cowering, maybe I should just stand up and welcome it. So I just said, come in, have a sit down. This is my wife. Do you want a cup of tea? I spoke to fear as a semi-autonomous thought form. And the moment I did that, it started to dissipate, and it started to convert into not just light, but a light. So I started to confront the fears on my pyramid. And literally if I was afraid of a spider, I'd pick a spider up, put it down, pick it up, let it run up my arm, put it down until I was no longer afraid of it. That gave me the confidence and an expanded consciousness, because I suddenly became aware that what I was afraid of had no intrinsic danger. It was just a perception that I'd let run around my head. When I dissolved that, the blinkers just expanded. I was able to see a bit more. I developed my courage. I developed my technique. So that helped me to go to the second pyramid, the second step, which was a fear of dentists. So I just set an appointment. I turned up at the dentist, and literally, as soon as I sat in the chair, the fear went, never came back, ever. That gave me massive confidence. So then I had a fear of entering karate tournaments. My biggest fear was just admitting that I had any fears. So I used to say, I'm not afraid of karate competitions. I just don't want to go into it. I just don't fancy it. But I was really terrified of it. So I went to the first karate competition that came up, which was the Liverpool Open, which was a bit like going to the Olympics in karate terms, because it was like one of the biggest tournaments in the country, and some of the best fighters in the world were in this tournament. I turned up, I had about 7 fights. I was never a tournament fighter, but the fear went. It disappeared. I still had natural adrenaline, but I had no fear. I could come and go from that whenever I wanted. The biggest fear on my pyramid was the fear of violent confrontation, which is what I was aiming for. But an interesting thing happened as I climbed the pyramid. I realized that these fears I'd written down were placeholders, and behind them were more subtle fears, fears I'd not even recognized, fears I could never get rid of because I didn't know they were there. I was afraid of my wife. It's embarrassing, but I was. I was afraid of marital confrontation. I was afraid of my mum. I was afraid of her abandoning me, even though I was a grown man. I was afraid of change. I didn't, even if I was working in the factory and somebody new came in to work with us, that would unsettle me for days because I just wouldn't, I just didn't deal very well with change. I was afraid of success. I always talked about success, but I was afraid of it. I didn't know what it meant. I had no idea what it meant. I didn't understand money, so money frightened me. So that consequently, whenever I got any money at all, I got rid of it as quickly as I could because I thought if I don't get rid of it, someone's going to take it off me. And I was afraid of the power of money. I didn't understand it as an intrinsic energy. So when I wrote these on the on the other steps of the pyramid, these fears started to demand answers from me. So what do you want? What is success? What does it mean to you? So it forced me to start educating myself. It forced me to start to expand my intellect. So the excuse me, the working arm of the soul is the will, and the will can only be informed by the intellect. So I needed to expand my intellect to inform my will on what were the right and wrong actions in the world. So before, my will was overtaken and my autonomy was lost to fear. Now that I was winning my will back by standing in front of fear and defeating fear, I was able to expand my intelligence and make better decisions. I can go, oh, of course, if I want to earn more money, I just need to educate myself and make myself more valuable in the workplace. I need to look at the skills I've got. At the moment, I've drawn a fear pyramid. I could teach people that. I can charge for that. I don't even have to do a normal job if I don't want to. I knew that most people around me were afraid of fear. They were afraid of, their greatest fear was the fear of fear. I could start to teach them about that. I recognized that everybody's life around me was determined by the level of fear they have. And they didn't break outside of that level of fear because they just didn't have a wide enough intellectual base. So they hadn't got a working arm of the soul, and they hadn't got the intellect of the soul. So I'm an autodidact, so I started to massively study. As I was guinea pig A in my own life. So I was studying myself every day, but I was also reading and started to educate myself. The top fear on the pyramid was a fear of violent confrontation. And I decided, and by this time I'd left my job as a shift worker in the factory, and I'd gone to college and learned to become a bricklayer. So I was starting to get some real skills. But I took this job as a nightclub bouncer, and just in order to overcome my fear of confrontation, because I recognised that I wasn't going to overcome my fear of confrontation from a classroom. I needed to be in the environment. I was a karate second dan, but I didn't know what worked in a real fight. And from what I could see in the dojo, there were some amazing fighters there, but they didn't know what worked either. They were still like block and counter. They were like trap and counter. Yeah. They were like, let them attack first. We don't attack first, and then we respond. And I was, even at the age of 15, standing in a pub, I knew that wouldn't work. I knew that a real fight was too frantic, too spontaneous, and too unpredictable to have any time to go, step back and block and punch. There was no room for that. Even I knew as a 15-year-old purple belt that wasn't going to work. So I thought I'll go on the door, first of all, to understand what works, and secondly, to test my newly found theory on overcoming fear by standing in front of it, by becoming desensitized to the feelings of adrenaline, by managing the endocrine system. So I did a couple of little odd nights, and then I was given a job as a doorman on a place called Buster's, which was like
OK Corral.
Yeah, it's like the OK Corral, like Tombstone. It was like the most, well, it was kind of like a cross between Sodom and Gomorrah and a bit of Pompeii brothel thrown in. It was the most colourful, exciting, exhilarating, frightening place. I mean, it was so exotic, but man, it was, you were being paid 4 times the day rate of a skilled worker to stand on that door, and with good reason. People wanted to kill you. People were dying on these doors. 4 of my friends were murdered, in and around that environment. It was a very, very real environment. So I stood there on the first night, and it was the longest night of my life. Believe me, I could feel the adrenaline from my toes to my scalp. And it was all I could do, using my technique to hold myself in that center. And the scariest man in the world took a dislike to my face and decided he wanted to bounce it against every sharp object in Coventry city centre. So I was just flooded with fear. So I learned more in one night than I'd learned in the previous 2 years or 3 years. And I decided there and then, this isn't for me. This is another level, and I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to make my apologies. I'm going to take it off my list. I've stood on the door. I've confronted my fear. I didn't run away. I didn't shout for my mum, although I felt like it. I didn't embarrass myself. Excuse me. But at the end of the night, John Awesome Anderson, he was the head doorman, who became my teacher. He said to me, "You're a bit of a greenhorn, but you stood still. You didn't run away. You didn't embarrass yourself. If you want to come back, you can come back, and I'll show you what you need to do." And I was so overwhelmed by that very little validation. And this guy was like a Greek god. You know what I mean? He was like, he was curling 220. He was squatting 5 plates, benching 4 plates, and he could punch like a professional boxer. Yeah. And he was like Clint Eastwood in black. You know what I mean? He was just the coolest guy. Yeah. So for him to validate me, I'll do a couple more weeks. And then I ended up, I don't know, close on to a decade as a doorman. That's where the first book came from.
Yeah, and I've been there as well, because I did, because obviously after your book, I kind of went down the same, I almost followed your blueprint for a minute, because I remember when I lost everything, and I went through this fear of confronting your fears, and then that's what I did. I had loads of confidence. I could talk my way out of a fight. I could actually probably bluff somebody to thinking like I'm well hard. But deep down, I'm like, if this guy tests me, I'm going to probably fall apart. And I remember putting myself onto a door, and I thought, what? Because I would train. I was doing kickboxing, I was doing the boxing, I was doing all these sort of things. And like you're always, it's interesting that trained fighters are often always questioning their own abilities. Yeah. And those who have never had a fight in their life are oozing full of confidence that they can take on the world.
Yeah.
And and being on the doors, it's always, for a lot of guys, it's temporary. We'll do it for a little while, earn a bit of money, and then move on. But we get grounded in it. It could be the guys you work with, the camaraderie that's there. It's the excitement, it's the respect, it is the action. It could be loads of things. And I remember one time when I was on the door, my head doorman, Great guy. Yeah, he said to me once, one night he just pulled me to the side. He's like, "What the fuck are you still doing it?" Like, what do you mean? He goes, "You're far too intelligent for this. You're far too like, you shouldn't really be here. Like, I can understand you've made your money. Like, I did it I went back to university. I was studying,
Yeah,
and he goes, "You shouldn't be here, dude." And I'm like, "You're right." And it was easy for me to get grounded in there. And I know guys
yeah,
were still there. They are
yeah. I
grounded.
do as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but how do you
I
how
know
and you,
people that have been there 30, 40 years.
yeah, and they don't move from there. And you're right. And what happens to them though? I mean, you stepped up, you stepped off, and you moved out.
Hmm. I think what I recognized was that the door was the greatest metaphysical experience of my life. It gave me, it was like a microcosm of the world. I understood causality through the door. I understood magic. I understood the use of magic sound. I understood the use of mudras, of, hand movements. I understood how to control my endocrine system. I understood and learned how to step inside somebody else's body and switch their endocrine system on to full alert, or switch it off so they were complacent. So I learned a massive amount. Mostly I learned that the futility of violence. I learned that everything I wanted in the world was beyond that fear. If I couldn't get control of my endocrine system, I wouldn't be able to do anything with my life. And if I did do anything, it would probably be up to the deficit of my body because of all the adrenaline coming in all the time. So I recognized that in order for me to elevate beyond the physical, beyond the psychological, beyond physical hardiness, I had to get beyond the endocrine system. I had to get control of the endocrine system. So the door taught me that. Well, I would say the environment taught me. It wasn't individuals so much that taught me. It was the environment. Each environment has its own egregore, has its own kind of consciousness, which is greater than the sum of all of its parts. And when you walk into that environment, it doesn't care who you are, what grade you are, what level you are. It'll just say, come into this environment and we'll teach you the truth of this environment. And that's what it did. It taught me what worked, what didn't work. But in order to understand, I had to let go of everything I thought I knew. I had to let go of the hierarchy. I had to let go of my teachers and masters. I had to let go of my grading syllabus and katas, and just come into an environment where the environment said, if you listen to me, I will calculate the trillions of decisions you need to make every night and give you the optimum decision, like a divine sat nav. So the environment taught me immediately what worked. It showed me truth, what they would call in Islam, yaqeen, certainty. The truth is undeniably right in front of you, but we're so clouded by concepts, precepts, cognitions, perceptions, old beliefs, traditions, cultures. We can't see the wood for the trees. So it said to me, clear that and I'll show you the truth. And the truth of real combat, because I wanted to know what worked, was so obvious it was insulting. But that truth, Cameron, was so potent that when I started to teach it and started to write it down and articulate it, it expanded from that small, shitty nightclub in Coventry across the world. Before I knew it, I was in Las Vegas, invited personally by Chuck Norris to teach for his 500 top black belts. The stuff went all across the world. The books went all across the world. And it wasn't because I was a great bloke. It was because I'd been gifted truth. And that small nugget of truth, which is all in Watch My Back, I've been unpacking ever since. So it was like a pearl of wisdom that I was given on the door. I wrote it down into a book. I expanded it. I articulated it. I looked at it, the depth and the height of it, and I put it out. I spoke to people about it. That helped me to articulate it more. And it was like the seed of an acorn. That's what it was. And what God was saying to me, the great egregore was saying to me was that if you plant that seed in fertile soil, it has the potential to grow for 500 years and be like an oak tree, 200 foot high. And it has the ability to grow or to fruit another million seeds of its kind, another million. And each of those million seeds has the potential to grow another million and ad infinitum. So what it was saying to me was that we're going to give you a small seed of truth because you've had the courage to come and stand on the door and stand in an intercourse with your fears. We're going to give you a truth that you will be unpacking for the rest of your life. And it will show you the infinite potential to grow, infinite potential, not just for me, not just for you, but for everybody listening to this, everybody out there that's been educated in scarcity, who thinks there are limitations. There are no limitations unless you accept limitations, unless you believe limitations. So for me, I was taken beyond denotation, beyond the labels, and I was given a seed of wisdom. That's why I always say, watch my back. People might think it's pretentious. It's a literary book. It's a metaphysical book. It's about what I learned in that time as a bouncer. Like I said, is still unfolding now. I'm still learning things that I've never read anywhere else, and it's because it came uniquely through for me. So the 50 books that I've written all come from that one book. The 15 multi-award winning films, the BAFTA, all the talks, all the articles, all come from the seed that's in that book. And I haven't got enough time within this one incarnation to bring out everything I've been gifted, but I'm trying. I mean, I've got some other books ready to be published now, but if we've got the courage to turn into fear instead of turning away, become guinea pig A in our own life, experiment, put ourselves in the petri dish, and intercourse with that fear and recognize it for what it is. It's just a feeling with a label. You know, it might feel overwhelming. It might feel like we can't cope with it, but actually, if we actually go into the very belly of the feeling, it's just a hot, warm, fuzzy feeling. We put the word fear to it, and our instinct is to turn and run away, or to strike out, or to freeze. I'm not saying this arrogantly, because I know that fear can be overwhelming to people at any level, no matter where they are. You can still get caught out by it. You can be caught out by any of the passions, but it's very hard if we take the label off it. It's just a surge of energy that we can make any shape we want with it. You know, I could set somebody on fire with petrol, or I could heat my house with it. You know.
Yeah. I was wondering, like, you took a chance on yourself. If you've had some self-mastery, you're constantly looking within yourself. Now, what is it that what do you think it is that stops other people from taking a chance on themselves?
Ignorance. If you look at Buddhism, and I don't mean that in a judgmental sense, they're just a lack of understanding. In Buddhism, they say that all of our issues come from ignorance, from lack of understanding. They say there are no problems in the world. The only problem in the world is believing that there's a problem. But there is a clear view. And if there's a clear view, that means there is an obscured view. The obscured view means I'm looking out the window, but I can't see clearly because there's loads of dirt on the window. If I clean the window, I'll get a clear view. That's what consciousness is. That's our ability to be conscious of all of our potential. So people haven't got if the working arm of the soul is the will, then the will can't operate without the intellect. So the intellect has to be expanded. So is that a ghost in the corner, or is it just a hat and coat on a stand with a lack of light? So it looks like a ghost in the corner or a person in the corner, but if I turn the light on, I realize it's just a coat and a hat on the stand. So that's what we do with the issues in the world. We are afraid of them because we haven't got enough information about them. So we need to expand our information, but that information won't be found unless we are prepared to stand before the things we're afraid of and absorb 99% of them. And this is to quote Ushiba, Maria Ushiba, who was the founder of Aikido. He said, all fears can be dissipated if we're prepared to absorb 99% of them. When we do that, they give up their tendency, they give up their power. This is what they call the birth of consciousness. If we look at the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the birth of Krishna. When Krishna is born, King Kamsa, who was like the ruler of the land, sends demons to kill him while he's still an infant, because he fears that he's going to take over his kingdom. Each time Krishna takes on one of the demons and beats it, the nature of the demon is liberated, and the effulgence, the energy that's locked inside the demon, comes over to Krishna and he expands. It's an allegory. It's saying that every time we face a fear and confront it, it contains a little spark of wisdom. The nature of the fear is liberated, and the energy that's locked in the fear comes over to us and we expand. Eventually, Krishna goes on to fight the king himself, fights King Kamsa. They have a great wrestling match. So in other words, he fights the demons, the semi-autonomous thought forms, the false beliefs, and then eventually he goes to the source of those beliefs, which would be the Satan or the ego, and he defeats the ego. So we need to subjugate the part of us that is afraid, and we need to convert all that energy into consciousness, into insight. So people don't achieve all of the problems. When we've listened to the Buddha, in Buddhism, all of the problems eventually revert themselves back to ignorance. So our job is to go, well, it's no good having a very strong will if I haven't got the intellect, the general to direct it. So I need to expand the will. So this is what Thomas Aquinas says, first we bend the bow in study. That's what we do. So we really bend the bow. If you imagine a bow, we bend the bow in study before we start firing arrows of knowledge. So deep study. And that's about discipline. But people don't study or can't study because they haven't developed the will. So the will isn't strong enough to make themselves sit down and study something 8 hours a day that they don't understand. But if they can make themselves just do an hour a day or 2 hours a day, if they can make themselves study, that means they've captained their will. Now, if you can stand on a nightclub door and face people that want to kill you, you've got a strong will. If you can take that will into writing a book, writing a film, writing a stage play, doing, a public talk, some public speaking, setting up a business, thriving in a relationship, that will can be used anywhere you want. Once you've got a strong will and a powerful intellect, there's nothing you can't achieve. And eventually, like I said, eventually we're not even the doers of it, because we expand so much that we connect to our higher self. We connect to the Godhead, and then the Godhead acts as an energy through us. So we just become a vessel for it. So we're no longer directed by the small ego. We're directed by the Godhead. So everything we need to do, then we're directed to it. Like if I'm going to go to Scotland now, I put on a sat nav and I trust that it will take me there street by street, road by road, city by city. I don't have to remember every single street in my head. It just calculates it and tells me. That's what we connect to. When the will expands enough, we have enough stability and enough balance, we connect to this higher power, and then that directs us. And then everything is taken into account. It's a beautiful equation when you do it, but it starts with, pick up a book. If you can't make yourself read it, then you need to exercise your will to make yourself read it. Go to a course. If you can't get yourself there because you haven't got the will, make yourself go and develop the will. If you can't get out of bed in the morning to train, you need to exercise your will. If you can't, people want to control the world, Cameron, but they can't control their own waist size. So where's their will? We need to start on our own body. If I want to develop the will, not difficult, take my clothes off, look in the mirror, where is the excess? Look in the inner mirror, where is the excess? Where are the virtues and where are the vices? Start cleaning your own body up, start exercising your will on yourself, guinea pig A on yourself, and watch how your will expands and watch how your intellect expands. And if you want to be good at something, you want to be a master at something, go into the environment. I could spend 100 years talking to people who've been bouncers, but I'd learn more on one night as a bouncer than in 100 years, because the environment would teach me immediately. I knew the moment I went onto the door The environment showed me immediately what would work and what wouldn't work. It was so obvious, it was insulting. I just couldn't believe that my teachers, these esteemed people of the martial arts community around the world, couldn't see it. I just couldn't understand, but they couldn't see it because they'd not gone into the environment with an open mind. Or maybe they could see it, but they didn't want to see it because they're running a 6 or 7 or an 8-figure company based on their ignorance, based on something that's not true. Very difficult, like Peter Constein says to me, very difficult to sell our system because it's just a preemptive strike. He said, if we do a photo shoot, it'd just be 2 pictures. Me stood in front of somebody, and then me stood in front of somebody on the floor. Just 2 pictures. So, you know, it's okay that you can say the truth is undeniably right in front of you, which is exciting, and it's true. But not everybody wants to see the truth. I worked with a guy a couple of years ago who come to me and said, I want to see the truth, because he was in business. And when we spoke for an hour, he realized that his whole 7-figure business was built on a lie. He nearly had a breakdown. The truth was terrifying to him, but he knew that before he came. He just wasn't consciously aware of it. And he wasn't looking at it because he didn't know how to say to his business partner, look, we're doing this all wrong. I said, look, if you can build a £1 million company on a lie, you can build £1 million company on truth. If you've got the wherewithal and the courage to be in business, even if it's you know, not completely aligned, you can, you know, gradually bring that into alignment. I don't think he ever did, but the truth is, the thing is, if somebody wants to, the reason people don't want to see the truth is because they might, if they see the truth, they might go, I'm married to the wrong person. I'm in the wrong system. I'm in the wrong job. I'm living in the wrong street. I'm driving the wrong car. I'm in the wrong body. Everything in their life will change, and that can create a psychosis if you're not ready for it. So God tends to bring us the truth by piecemeal, a little bit at a time, but be in no doubt the truth is right there. And that's what I would like to excite your listeners with and say to them, you know, the truth isn't going to come through your telly box, because all that does is, you know, just bake the bread of propaganda for the masses to digest in their bellies. You're not going to get it through the television. You know, the television works on a process of what bleeds leads. You're going to get massively subjective information. If you want the truth, you have to go beyond the revealed information. You have to go to the hidden information. You have to go beyond the revealed books and go to the hidden books. They are there for everybody, but mostly stand in front of it, have a look at it, question it. Most people don't do this, and I didn't do it myself until I had a crisis in my life, and the crisis created a bardo, an in-between state where I was able to access truth. So if someone's out there now and they're in a crisis, they're going through a crisis in their life, it's a great opportunity to find truth. It's an absolutely perfect opportunity. But I was also saying you don't have to wait for a crisis. Just start looking for the truth. Just start studying.
There's a line I heard. I actually heard it on another podcast, and it was that people live quiet lives of desperation.
Yeah, yeah.
Where, I mean, like, it's, I mean, from a guy's perspective, they get grounded in their job and their bills and their mortgage and their family and everything else, and they do things they have no passion for, no care for in the world. They just go to the cubicle, sit in front of the computer, sell insurance, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And how true is that? It is, because now you'd think in the social media world that we have now that our lives have been opened up to the possibilities, what is out there, what you can have out there. For example, obviously, you know, back in the, like when you were writing, for example, Watch My Back, you didn't have access to all these different social channels where you could send a message to the public. Like the guy who owns the publication, you just send a message to him right away.
Yeah.
You have none of that. And now we have our eyes have opened up to what's possible, but still the voice of fear, the voice of doubt. And for some reason, I don't know, I don't understand, that inner voice is always so dark. That voice that tells us you shouldn't be doing this, you can't be doing this. It's like the imposter syndrome. Like when you mentioned before you were second or fifth Dan?
I was the second Dan when I went on the door.
When you got the second Dan, you realized, like, you're a master martial artist, but you probably in a real fighting world, it just wouldn't work that well. And
I knew it
sometimes,
was a facade. Yeah,
yeah, and sometimes I think as business owners, a lot of people have imposter syndrome, where like your guy who had the seven-figure business might be thinking, "What am I doing here? How did I get here?"
yeah, yeah.
So how do I mean, and how do we? Why is that voice always so dark? Why is that voice always debilitating, telling you not good enough, not strong enough, not intellectual enough, not tall enough, not pretty enough,
Yeah,
whatever it is? Why is
yeah.
that voice always so dark?
Well, I would just say, why are you listening to that voice?
Mm,
Observe it. See
mm,
how powerless it is if you don't listen to it. That voice isn't you. But
mm,
I'd also say, if you look at a light bulb, right, you've got a negative terminal, a positive terminal, and you've got a filament that joins the two. So you need the negative and positive, and you need a filament that joins them, acts as a conductor. That's what creates light. The positive terminal on its own is impotent. The negative terminal on its own is impotent. It's only when we join the two together with the filament that we can create light. So we need dark and light, but we need to understand that those different voices, and we need to manage them. So what I would say is, there's only one of you in there that's authentic. Our job, this is what they call apophatic theology. It just means finding the self via negation. So I'd say find out which one is you, and all the ones that aren't you, get rid of them. The ones that talk you down, the ones that are negative, the dark voice, just observe it until it, if you engage it, of course, you give it life. If you go into it and start listening to it and start debating with it, you've engaged it, you've incarnated it, you've given it life. There are lots of personalities in every single person. We've got to identify which is the unique personality, which is the authentic personality. So I don't have a voice in my head saying that. I just don't. I don't allow it. I never allow that voice. If I have anything negative rising up, I automatically take my third eye, in other words, my awareness, and I just observe it. And I treat it like I'm on a nightclub door camera. If a negative voice comes to the door, you're not coming in. That's why it was a metaphysical experience. I wasn't defending the door of a shitty nightclub. I was defending the door to my will, to my autonomy. Now, if I let that negative voice come in and talk negative to me, and I engage it, then it's going to incarnate me. I've let it into the kingdom, and it's going to take over. So through this practice of observation, and there's a great book out there for this called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. It's probably the best book in the world on this technique. We dissolve those subpersonalities, or those pain bodies, or those semi-autonomous thought forms, or demonic parasites, whatever you want to call them, false cognitions, old beliefs. When they rise up, we practice not engaging them. We don't identify with them. We dissolve them. And of course, we make sure that we're clean. That voice can't rise up and engage you if it doesn't find something. If I'm sitting watching sexual pornography on my computer at night, all sorts of beast and foul are going to try and enter my consciousness, because I've already let some of them across the threshold. I've allowed them to come across the threshold for my own pleasure. But once they're in there, they're parasitical. They stay in you, and then they call you to these excesses whenever they want. So if I'm sitting around that gossiping about my friends or other people outside Costa, if I'm fiddling my books or fiddling my expenses, if I'm cheating on my wife, even if I'm just cheating with her in my head, even if I'm just thinking of somebody else and I'm having sex with her, if I've got any kind of deviant in me, or any kind of divide, or any kind of negativity, these parasites are going to run towards that, because it's a feed for them. So my job in my own life has been to make my body inhospitable for those feelings, for those voices. And I've either converted them into a light, and they've become, words in a book, or I've kicked them out like squatters. So the first job is to not go, why is that voice there? But to say, why am I listening to that voice? Not to say, what should I be eating? Not what you're eating. What is it you're feeding? And like I said, so we start to look at, who am I? Because if we want to, if we really want to do something with our life, we have to identify absolutely who we are. Because the kid that listens to this interview now and is inspired and is infused to do something won't be the kid that wakes up on Monday morning at 5 o'clock to meditate or to go for a run. It'd be a different kid, it'd be a different voice, it'd be a different personality. So we have to root them out. We have to find out who we are. We have to locate our own singularity, our own authentic self. And then we have to expand that by winning back all of our territories. We win back the territory that's been stolen by addiction. We win back the territory that's been stolen by greed or by envy or by judgment, by any of the vices. We win back those territories. Each time we win back a territory, we expand in consciousness, we become more grounded, and then our words are apostles. And when I speak and I use magic sound, what in Japanese Aikido they'll call it kotodama gaku, or you could call it heka, the use of sound. When I use sound, I'm not just emitting sound and vibration. I'm literally emitting spirit. I'm emitting truth, and that will go into you and into other people, and it will inspire them. They will be in spirit, and that will encourage. That will go into them like a paraclete. A paraclete is like a comforter, or an interlocutor, like an intermediary, or like an intercessor. So this paraclete will go in like a medicine and start to dissolve any kind of parasite that's existing inside you. People think that we're the top of the food chain, Cameron. We're not. We're being devoured every single day by semi-autonomous thought forms that are implanted in us through the television, through the media, through our friends, through our family, through people who are living in ignorance. And that might sound fantastical, but and it might sound demonic, but it's not personal. If I walk across the field in front of me now and a bug jumps on my leg and starts to suck my blood, I don't see that as personal. I just see that that's a parasite doing what it does. But if we don't recognize that as human beings, and this is in the Quran, this is in the Christian Bible, this is in the Gita, this is in the, this is in the Guru Granth Sahib, this is in the Mahabharata, this is in the Dhammapada, the Buddhist book. So it's in all the books. This information is freely available. It's there. You might have to go, well, you don't even have to go beyond the revealed books to see it. This is there. This is going on, but people don't know it. So they're constantly being taken over by parasites, parasitical entities, little bugs that get inside people. It might be you might say it's Eckhart Tolle would call it a semi-autonomous thought form. So it's like a parasitical thought form that comes in, nags away, gets you to do the wrong things, leaves you to pick up the shit, leaves you to pick up the karmic debt. So if we want to really work, we need to find out who we are. What's the quickest way to find out who we are? Find out who we're not. We know who we're not. I am not the guy that fiddles my taxes. So if I'm doing that, that's got to go. I'm not the guy that cheats on my wife, even if it's just mentally. So that's got to go. I'm not jealous. So if that rises up, I'm going to dismiss it. I'm going to go to war with it. I'm not envious. So if my friend is doing better than me and I feel envious, I'm going to ring him up and say, you inspire me. I'm so inspired by what you're doing. I'm not greedy. If I earn £1 million, I'm going to pay every bit of tax I need to pay. I'm going to live by the law of Caesar. If I'm within this world and that's the rules we've got, I shall work within them and to the limit of them. So we've got to find out who we are. So we find out who we are by gradually stripping away who we're not. And we make our body and our mind inhospitable for parasites. They only turn up if there's room. It's like if you look at certain plants, they only attract parasites if they're in a stressed state. If they're in a healthy state, parasites don't come anywhere near them. So it's the same with us. If we're in a healthy state, if we have homeostasis, if we are balanced, if we're balanced people, if we've spent our life evicting all of these squatters, there's no room for parasites to enter. They would burn up on contact, Cameron. Absolutely burn up on contact. So the exciting thing is if we've got that in us now, we can convert that. We can convert that through our work ethic. That will become the burnt offering. That will be the volition of our work. So find out who you are. Start with Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. It's a fantastic book on this. I wrote a book called Notes from a Factory Floor, which is about my whole journey from Watch My Back to now. That tells you all this stuff we're talking about now. It tells you how I did that, how I found it, and how that information is available to everybody. This is not about conspiracies. There are not people sat in a room trying to make life difficult for me and Cameron. You know, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there is a natural law. We need to understand it. And there are natural forces that we need to recognize. And we need to start working with them, and where necessary, working against them. And if we need proof of that, we only have to look out the window. We only have to switch on the telly. Proof's there every single day. I've got a friend who works in Sky News, and he said it makes him ill. He's trying to move on. It makes him ill because he said they just want stories that are sensational. They said if it bleeds, it leads. They want stories of horror. You know, they want stories about people's eyes popping out. They want stories of murder. They want stories of people's heads being cut off. And it's the parasites in people that feed off that. That's not where I get my breakfast and supper. There are some amazing books out there, some amazing information, and some amazing teachers where you can get a much better lunch.
There was a film you wrote, I think it was called Brown Paper Bag.
Yeah.
And there was a little scene in there. I think I remember seeing it from another video. I think you're describing what you're trying to get through on that one scene. Is that part where the girls, I think she glasses the barmaid and she just starts screaming "F you" at everybody in the room. Yeah. I remember you explaining that as a representation of creative energy.
Yeah. That's just energy. Take the label off. This is, rage, anger. Write it down on the board. Rage, anger, envy, jealousy. If you go to the place of denotation, in other words, if you take the labels off, what are you left with? Go back through the labels and you're just left with massive raw energy. Now the rage I had when I was younger, and the dissonance, the confusion, and the depression, all that energy that I had, what I've done is I've captained my will, I've expanded my intelligence, and I've allowed a higher force to tell me where to direct that. So that rage you see is coming through in this talk now. So I'm directing it like a laser point, so it goes out there and it impregnates people with inspiration. That's what I'm doing. I'll sit down when I wrote Notes from a Factory Floor and the Divine CEO, 300,000 words in 12 weeks. I just sat down full time and wrote those 2 books. So all of my rage, all of my anger, I've denoted it, I've delabeled it, and I've just channeled it straight into the work. So the darkness that I had in me has not just become light, it's become a light. So these negative semi-autonomous thought forms have become angelic or divine spiritual forms. They've been converted. I've drawn them into the furnace of my creative juices and made them into something beautiful. So if we can, I met people like Reggie Cray, and I met people like Mad Frankie Frazier, and we know these are dark characters, but believe me, when I was in a room with Mad Frankie Frazier, we shared a studio when we were doing a radio show. This guy was small in physical stature, but man, he filled the room. He could have filled stadiums. His energy was so immense, but it was psychotic. But I could see a divine signature behind it. I could see that the energy he tapped into was coming through very dark filters, but it still had a divine signature. And if he could have captained that energy, he would have filled stadiums, because he was so dynamic and he was so charming and he was so enigmatic, and he had so many great qualities that were absolutely destroyed by this dark filter. Reggie Cray was the same. Reggie Cray used to ring me up because he liked the book I wrote. And at the time I wrote Watch My Back, I was getting phone calls and emails from all sorts of weird and wonderful characters. Charles Bronson wrote to me from, Charles Bronson.
Yeah.
He wrote to me from prison about
He
how
found
much
your
he loved the
book.
book. Yeah, he wrote and said, "You'll never write a better book than this in your lifetime." And I'm beginning to believe it's true, because everything I do now, every single thing comes from the Pandora's box of Watch My Back. He was true in what he said. Everything I do now has come from that. But yeah, so I remember Reggie Cray ringing me, and I could feel his power permeating through the phone. I could feel the seduction. I could feel him wanting to climb inside me and take over me. I could feel a dark energy, but the signature of that was powerful. The signature of this gangster in London is permeated across the world. There are films after films after films and books after books written about this guy. And it's not because he was a dark character, it's because the signature behind it was divine. And if it come through very dark filters and it ended up in very dark places, which I would never recommend. But if you could have got someone like that and cleaned those filters, how many stadiums could he fill? He could have been another Billy Graham. He could have been another Al Ghazali. He could have been an amazing guru, because what he was tapping into was powerful. It was just being misused. So I took inspiration from that. Same as when I worked on the door. Anybody that could have a fight, anybody, and I worked with some amazing fighters, I took lessons from them. I took one-on-one teaching from them in an environment that did not suffer fools. If it didn't work on the door, you went to the A&E or worse. So you're in an environment where it has to work. And I work with some of the best people in the world, same as in martial arts. But I didn't take their dark stuff, or the dark stuff that they had, because a lot of them went into crime, a lot of them went into drugs. Some of them became murderers. Some of them became, two of them are doing double life sentences at the moment. But even beyond that, these two particular people, I fucking loved them. They were so charismatic. They went dark, and I don't admire that. But if we could have captured that and cleaned the filters, got rid of the obscurations, there would have been healers. That's what they would have been. So
Maybe
so
in
I
another
love
life.
that.
So it's like maybe in another life or another time they would have been great conquerors or
I think so. Yeah.
Achilles or something like that.
Yeah. So they're just kind of off. But I mean, what they took, what they gave me, I'm taking and I'm cleaning it anyway. I'm working it through. I'm putting it into books, and and I'm saying, let's just, let's get rid of the rock and the shell around this, and let's just find the gold, because there's gold in all those people. I mean, I idolize some of them, So it's just, you just take the gold from it.
One of your books you mentioned, The Divine CEO.
Yeah.
I know you're quite a prolific writer. You're writing sometimes, like you mentioned previously, those last 3 books just came one after the other.
Yeah.
And obviously, as anyone would say, like, it's a nice, for anyone who wants to write a book, it always starts with a great idea. And more often we might start one week with being super excited about it, but then it just falls off a trail.
Yeah.
How do you keep your level of consistency? Is it because everything is so raw and it's just your expression that
It's
keeps you going?
because I'm disciplined, Cameron, because I've got control of my will. I've used the martial arts and the doors to get mastery over my will. If I can't control my will, I can't make myself do difficult things. If I'm going to create something fantastic, there's going to be opposition. There's going to be a positive energy, but there's going to be a negative energy trying to stop me. I have to place my soul, my will, as the filament between the two and be prepared to burn in order to create. That's what you have to do. The filament isn't just the conductor between the negative and positive. It's the burning point. So you have to have a great tolerance. You have to have a very high burning point. So I've got the will and the intellect to place myself between the two opposing energies and create light from that arc. So that will is something I've developed over a long period of time. And it's something I still work on every single day. I have to win my will back every morning when I get up to meditate. So people stop because they feel opposition and they're talked out of it. But that opposition needs to be recognized as a potent energy and it needs to be brought into the mix. We need the dark, we need the light, we bring them together in this arc and we create from there. That's what we need to do. This is what the poet Rumi said: there is a field beyond right and wrong, I will meet you there. In Judaism, they say friends meet in a narrow place. They're both saying the same thing. So this field of light in the arc of creation, in a light bulb, for instance, is this field of light is the place beyond good and bad. It's the two brought together. This narrow place, what they call the narrow gate, if you look at a filament, it's very, very thin, but it conducts massive energy. So this filament is the narrow place. So friends meet in a narrow place. It's an allegory. It's a simile. So the narrow place is this thin band of soul that we place between the two opposing energies. It's not enough just to sit in it and create it. We need to understand it. If we don't understand it intellectually, you're going to sit down to write a book and have massive opposition and think, oh, I'm wasting my time, and you'll be talked out of it. But if you recognize opposition as a good sign, opposition means I'm going to grow. Like if I pick up a weight, I know the opposing weight is going to build my muscle. I don't go, oh, fucking hell, it's heavy, let's put that down. I use the weight to create the burn, to create the arc, to create the growth. It's exactly the same with any creative endeavor. You sit down. I mean, this film I'm doing a film at the moment that we're shooting in July. I'm on draft 21.
Okay.
It's not like I just write it and it goes out and gets filmed. Draft 21. My first film, which was based on Watch My Back, called Clubbed, took me 15 years. 15 years of holding my will, developing my will, expanding my intellect before we could raise the £2 million to make that. And then we made it. I did a film called Romans with Orlando Bloom. It's called I think it's called Retribution now in America, but it's a great acclaim. But it was the hardest thing in the world to sit myself in front of this subject matter, which is about metaphysical forgiveness. I had so much opposition in me. I had so much resistance to not do this. It took every ounce of my practiced will to place myself in between those two forces and burn. I literally had to burn to create it. But now you see the film, it's this amazing expression of divinity, this amazing apostle of divinity, which is talking about the metaphysical power of forgiveness, the ability to exorcise. Forgiveness is about exorcising dissonance, anger, fear. It's about giving it over to reciprocity. It isn't about letting people off, but it's such a potent subject that every time I write about it, I get huge opposition in my body, in my life. And what I do is I recognize that because I've expanded my intellect, and I bring the negative and positive poles together with my practice will, literally by sitting down. When I sit down, like for instance now, I have an energy that wants to do this interview. I have an energy that's afraid to do this interview. By placing my will, my soul, the extension of the will, between the two forces and talking, I am burning all those energies up in the volition of this interview. So this is me creating a light from darkness, because there are always opposing forces when I start to do an interview, because I know that I'm going to reveal truth. So there will be opposition, and the opposition is the parts of you that doesn't want to be burned up. It doesn't want to make the effort. So when somebody isn't able to sit down, they just need to understand why they're sitting down. They need to understand the natural opposing forces, and they need to be prepared to burn. They need to be prepared to suffer, because anybody that learns is going to suffer. Anybody that creates is going to suffer.
Yeah, I remember you saying that change can be painful. It's not even the spiritual enlightenment that, like, you're very spiritual in a very non-spiritual world. And many people are afraid to go within themselves and talk openly about how they see the world, the cosmos, and everything, the energy forces. And it's just marvelous that we live in a very noisy world now, especially. There's so much happening,
Very true.
Yeah, it's constant. So we don't have time. There's a lot of people who just shy away from spirituality altogether.
You can't
But
hear the small, still voice while there's so much noise.
yeah,
And a lot of the noise is ambition. People feel as though they need to get on. They need to get by. They need to get in. They need to get noticed, and they forget what they're doing it for. They forget why they're trying to build conglomerates. The only reason we should be doing it is to serve other people, or well, ultimately to serve God. We need to receive in order to share, and if we can do that, there is abundance. But people fall into egoic living, and in egoic living, it's just about me. It's just about me getting by. It's about me getting security. One of my friends said to me, once I've got 100 million in the bank, I know I'm secure, but I know no amount of money is secure because it's temporal. Look at the virus now; it's wiped out the world economy. Fortunes have gone like that. Ronaldo moves 2 bottles of Coke off a table and replaces it with water and wipes 4 billion off the stock price of Coke.
Just like that,
Coca-Cola. Money is temporal. It doesn't even exist. It has no existence other than as a perception. It hasn't even got a gold bullion, to back it up. It's just a perception. It's just an idea that we all agree on. But in and of itself, it has no reality. So we have to really question where we are and what we're doing and where we're going. The ego wants to find eternity. It wants to find security. It wants to live forever. This is why people are talking about legacy and all the rest of it. But it's just small thinking. It's okay. There's a realm where that might work, but legacy is small thinking because, in the span of the cosmos, I hope I'm completely forgotten. I'll put the stuff out there, and I'm hoping that someone will be inspired by it, and it will act as an intercessor. But 2,000 years is just like a grain of sand on the beach in the whole aspect of time. So for me, I'm only really interested in love. I'm only really interested in telling my story, which is all I've got, and hoping that somebody will be comforted by that, directed by that it might act as an intercessor in their life, that they might be inspired by that it might take them in a better direction. So for me, I've managed to reduce everything I do in my life down to just that. There is nothing in my life, nothing that I don't do from a place of love. My whole life, I've reduced everything in my life so that nothing is about making money, nothing is about making friends or winning awards or being validated. None of that in my life. All I do is, my whole life is just about doing talks like this, writing, studying, and being with my family. That's all I do. But it's took me a long time to intellectually understand that. And then it took me quite a long time to reduce all of my footprint, because I had quite a lot of, I had properties and stuff like that. I've reduced all that so I can just live in a place where I don't need to earn money. It doesn't mean that I don't earn money, and it doesn't mean that I don't charge for things. It doesn't mean that, but it means I don't need to earn money.
One of the things that you mentioned, this was like at the beginning of the interview, and this is probably the last thing we might speak about. I know there's something you're working on right now, I think, was the forgiveness project. And I've often thought about forgiveness as much as I could, because obviously we, as human beings, we do mistakes all the time. We commit, I've done some horrible things I can think of.
Yeah.
And we always crave forgiveness from others. But one of the things that I found in forgiveness, when it's from the other side, I remember there was a clip that went pretty viral, which was of a man whose son was murdered. And he hugs this man in the courtroom. This is the father of the victim hugging the killer.
Powerful, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and it was powerful, really powerful. It shook a lot of us to our core. I think it really, really made me emotional. I remember seeing him hug this person, but it was as if the father, the victim's father, sorry, he had this release, and I couldn't understand the power of forgiveness. Can you describe where does the power lie in forgiveness? Where is it that release that lets things just go and then bring you back somewhere? Yeah, and instead of retribution, instead of venge. I mean, one of the most natural elements within us is vengefulness, to get back or whatever. So how does forgiveness create power?
Well, it's recognizing law, first of all. We have to understand, we have to have enough understanding or intellect to understand reciprocity, causation, the law of compensation. We have to recognize that nobody escapes a crime. Nobody escapes the consequence of their action. Nobody. That's obvious. It's so obvious, it's insulting. But a lot of people don't understand that. They think that people get away with things, but nobody can. So if we don't understand that, if we don't understand causation, we can't really operate in the world. Because if we think other people can get away with things, that means we think we can get away with things. So it means we're often doing things which we think, if they're not seen, they're not hurting anybody, or if they're not seen, I won't get into trouble. But when you understand causation, you recognize that, as Muhammad says, even your skin will speak a testimony against you. It's in the cells. To recognize causation, recognize that everything that goes out returns. This is good in two ways. It's good because it means if I do bad things, that will return to me, which means I don't want to do bad things anymore. It's good because it means if I do good things will continue to return as well. So if we don't understand causation, we can't even begin to start working. Once we understand causation, and once we understand that we haven't got the ability to pardon people. People think that forgiveness is pardon. It's not. What forgiveness is means we give it over. It means we let go of anger, we let go of fear, we let go of dissonance, and we give the debt over to reciprocity or to God. Now, we have to have an understanding of that. If we don't have an understanding of it, we just think that won't work. We think someone's going to get away with something. The reason the guy hugs the person who killed his son in prison is because he realizes that person has to face karma. He has to face consequence. We don't commit the sin against the person. We commit the sin against the law. Once we understand we've committed the sin against the law, the divine law, we don't look for forgiveness from the person, or we don't look to pardon the person. We just give it over to that. So the sin against the law can't be pardoned at the level of man. We can go through jurisprudence and all the rest of it, and we can get crime sorted out. But unless somebody absolutely fully repents in their heart, it isn't going to be pardoned. So there's only one force that can pardon, and it's not us. So when I forgave the person who sexually abused me, and I felt very proud of myself, but afterwards I realized it was a quiet conceit. I had done so many things wrong in my life, so many things, hurt so many people. I didn't need to worry about what this guy had done to me. I just needed to give him back to reciprocity and come away and work on my own repentance. And repentance means repair. It means return. It means refuge. It means to come back to the center. It means to come away from the divided selves. It means to get rid of all the parasites and come back to the self. So when we recognize that if we hold a grudge, if we hold anger, if we hold resentment, we are bound to the object of our resentment. We are bound to them, which means we're entangled. Quantumly, we're entangled. So even if we're separate from them by thousands of miles, even if we're separated from them by death, if he dies, they are still inside us, they're still entangled with us, and they're still operating through us because they leave a parasite in us. The parasite is called anger, resentment, revenge. Once we recognize that it's a parasite, once we recognize that our anger feeds our abuser, we recognize that by forgiving him, we are getting rid of that. Then we give him over to reciprocity, and it clears us of all the parasites this person's let in us. So it's not what he's done to us that's the issue. It's what he's left in us that's the issue. So for me, when I forgave my abuser, I recognized I'd given him back to reciprocity. Some years later, he committed suicide and killed himself. I went off and I cleaned out all the parasites that he'd left in me, because he'd left them in me, but they weren't feeding anymore because I'd forgiven him. So the power is in disentangling from the nature of the abuse. While we are angry with somebody, we are bound to them, and we feed them through time and space. Because I remember the guy that abused me when I was 11, he was still abusing me when I was 40. I hadn't seen him for 30 years, but he was still inside me, still operating inside me as insecurity, as sexual deviance. I used to self-harm. I used to sexually self-harm. And that was him, his parasite in me working. Once I recognized that and I forgave him and I stopped feeding that parasite, it was gone. Not only was it gone, it was converted and I expanded. I became disproportionately large internally in my consciousness because I rid myself of all these energy sapping parasites. So it's understanding what forgiveness is. We haven't got the ability to pardon people, but we do have the ability to give them over to a power that does have the ability to pardon. When we do that, the energy that they've stolen from us, we get back. That's what they say in Judaism. If you ever see a person that's abused, you run after him and serve him. He may have something of yours and you need it back. So that's what we do. We get it back by finding kindness. That guy, the guy that killed that guy's son, he would have been more debilitated and injured by that forgiveness than anything else he could have done, anything else at all. Because what the guy did was really sever himself from that person with love, with compassion. It's, if you go into the Quran, or if you look at Maimonides did 13 aspects of forgiveness, and it's very powerful when we start to talk about what we're actually doing. We're giving it over to a power that can right it. We have this human conceit that we have the ability to forgive somebody, where all the time their parasite is just feeding off that ignorance. So it's just expand the awareness a little bit. And again, don't take my word for this. People should go out and they should study it and they should look at it. Look at Maimonides, look at Al-Ghazali, look at look at any of the Christian mystics. It's very, very powerful. It's right there, but it's also obvious. If somebody's still making you angry 10 years after they hurt you, it means they're still feeding off you. It means you're still bound to them. You're still entangled with them. They have left something of themselves in them. So give it them back. It's not even yours. Give it them back. Don't let them leave a parasite in you. That's where the power is.
Geoff, I think we'll leave it there, Geoff. It's been an absolute pleasure of mine, and I'm sure that there's been a lot of gold from this conversation. I really hope it helps somebody out there that listens to this.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, by the way, just to let you guys know, so the books that Geoff Thompson has mentioned, A Divine CEO, is it Notes from a Factory Floor?
Notes from a Factory Floor, yeah.
Watch My Back, all of them. I'll put the links in the description, so as soon as you hear this, you can just hit that button and grab that book. And I've been doing audiobooks lately because I haven't had the time to sit and read for a long time. But lately, I've been doing audiobooks, which has really helped because I spent some time.
Great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've switched off talk radio, actually, because talk radio was so it's combative.
It's so contentious, isn't it?
It is. And I just had to switch all that off. But no, thank you so much, Geoff. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much. So hopefully see you again.
Okay, Cameron. See you later.
God bless. Take care, man. And that concludes the interview with Geoff Thompson. It's been an absolute pleasure having him on the show. Folks, if you look in the description, you'll find the links to a lot of the books he's written and the works that he's done. I highly recommend you check them out. Anyone interested in self-mastery, self-revelation, especially anyone who has a problem dealing or handling fear, 1000% I say check him out. I mean, look, I've had this book, like I said, for the last 15 odd years, and I still go back to it if I need to. Other books of Geoff's, which I've got in my library, my little bookshelf, I do go back to occasionally, and there are some real gems in there. So I highly recommend you just checking it out, and maybe you might find that same experience that I found when I first picked up his book. So by all means, check it out. And until then, we'll see you on the next show. Thank you for joining us.